Stephen, you might have to unmute. Good morning, everyone.
Sorry about that. I need to automate that. Hi, everyone. Welcome to AWS Made Easy, episode number 8. This is live, and still learning how to do this. Thank you for bearing with us. And thank you, welcome, Rahul, and thank you for our ASL interpreters, Tess, and later we'll have Allison. Thank you for making this webinar more accessible to a wider audience. Really appreciate you doing this. So, Rahul, how are you doing? How was your weekend?
Weekend was awesome. We made a trip to Cape Disappointment, and to be honest, not disappointing at all. It was fabulous. Though it was a little wet and cold, but we had family, friends. It was quite an amazing weekend camping out there. And this week looks like really awesome weather here in Seattle. So yeah, it's been bright and sunny for the last 2 or 3 days. Finally, just as we were wrapping up our camping, we packed all of our stuff into the cars, and we were just ready to kind of head out. That's when the sun came out. For the entire 2 days of the weekend, it was dark and gloomy, but we had a lovely campsite. We were glamping of sorts. We had a yurt and had a nice fire going, and we had really nice neighbors in the camping area who let us use their canopy so we could all stay dry. So it was pretty awesome.
Oh, that sounds
What about
fantastic.
you?
I'm glad it wasn't disappointing.
How's your weekend?
One of my sisters is getting married soon, and so we had a little party for her. I think it was her bachelorette party, so my wife went, and I was with the kids. That was really fun. And then we had a Father's Day barbecue. So had a couple of parties. That was really nice. Definitely needs to go get some gym time in, a couple of light meals. But it's all in good fun and good festivities.
Oh, really cool.
It's so bright. I had to close my window shade to not wash out the colors.
It looks like AWS was having some sort of festivities themselves. As you and I were discussing on Friday, things were going berserk with AWS announcements. I think we've had a record number of announcements this week across all the different services, and my phone was just going crazy with all the alerts that were coming in. So this is going to be an interesting week to discuss all the different announcements that they get. I'm not sure we're going to have time to do all of them. But
considering we usually make it through about half to 2/3 of our planned ones, I think that at some point I had this idea that we could have a little timer where we have to say, okay, we have 5 minutes per segment. But maybe we'll try that at the next What's New review.
Yeah, I think that would be a fun thing. Or to make it even more entertaining, have these electric buzzers that you have kind of where you put your arm on it and it buzzes you every time you kind of overshoot. But it's really hard to kind of not overshoot, right?
Oh, well, I mean, it's so interesting. So that's yeah, I agree. I think that's a good problem to have. There's so much to talk about and so much to go over. And so for those of you who are new in this show, sometimes we have guests, and sometimes we review new announcements on AWS, and sometimes there's a mixture of both. So I think with that, we should jump right into our first segment. We've got a little introduction, and then we'll jump into our first article. There we go. That's our new intro to our What's New review segment. All right. So our first article today is AWS just announced support for cross-region search in Amazon OpenSearch service. So the idea is OpenSearch or Elasticsearch. There is previous to this announcement, you could have data in different, I guess, within a region and replication, but now you can have data mirrored across regions and then search that data across clusters. So, Ro, why is this a big announcement, or why is this a big deal?
So I think the first time we saw something like this was with Aurora, the database service, and the the tech that AWS built to separate out the compute and the storage is a pattern that now we see them applying across various different services. So when Aurora first, was designed, they had this multi-AZ replication that they created that allowed you to have um, all these new instances in the cluster kind of fail over very quickly. Replication, followed asset properties, and you could manage all of that stuff within this replication. It was a lot of the constraints that were created by the cap theorem around the trade-offs that you need to make started kind of blurring a little bit because of this tricky separation of compute and storage. They took that to another level with Aurora, where they started creating a better mechanism of replicating across regions. Now, of course, there are higher latencies when you're replicating across regions, but given that they have the kind of backbone that they have, they managed to create some optimizations where it isn't too bad. It is possible to now replicate data across the regions and fail over there, or load balance over there if necessary. Now, they seem to be bringing that same tech over to a bunch of other storage technologies. Like, I foresee this, showing up in, I mean, of course, we are seeing it now in OpenSearch, but the same thing happening in Neptune, the same thing happening in, a lot of other services like, the time series database, time stream. I see this being a common pattern that you'll see. You'll also see that what was built for Aurora serverless is probably something that's going to happen with a whole lot of other databases. Like the same pattern of having your compute units being able to scale up and down within 0.5 or 1 times the compute units. That whole mechanism and pattern that they're able to stamp out across these services is pretty remarkable. So I would anchor on the Aurora kind of pattern, because right now what I see is AWS Aurora is kind of like the leading service that is testing out a bunch of these new patterns of replication, patterns of separating out compute and storage, maintaining certain kinds of consistencies and guarantees and SLAs. I would keep my eye out and look at all the other data storage services, and I expect to see all of those patterns being replicated in the near future.
So for some context, for just to get everyone on the same page, when you mentioned the cap theorem, so that's the idea that systems can have at most 2 of consistency, availability, and we call partition tolerance. So being able to be distributed across multiple computers, multiple areas. And so what we're seeing, you said, underneath this is Aurora, and this is a common pattern of AWS. Is if they use their, say, lower order services and then they build higher order things on top of them. And so the benefit that we all get from that is that they improve the lower order ones. The higher order ones, they get their benefit because they're built from it. So in this case, like you're saying, the replication, the increased reliability. And so watch out for things for both Aurora and then also things built on Aurora.
Correct. So just for context, the big breakthrough that Aurora had was the ability to take the data and use the S3, backbone under the hood. And because they had built this amazing multi-AZ replication into S3, they were able to leverage it pretty much as is to build the storage layer for Aurora. So the minute you write something, it immediately gets replicated across 3 different AZs, and that's available to you right out of the box as a service. So now that you could look at storage as one single, through one single lens, and all the other replication and all the other needs that you have around storage are taken care of for you, you could then add the compute layer on top of it, independent of the storage. So you could scale up compute, you could scale up storage separately, you could replicate stuff, you could fail over a lot easier. And that's been the big breakthrough for Aurora. And now you'll get that with OpenSearch. I foresee this happening with Neptune. I foresee this happening with, you know, a bunch of other services. Yeah.
Great. And then we see that this works on both OpenSearch and Elasticsearch, which is pretty neat. I didn't realize that they both had the same, that they were both able to leverage that same Aurora backend technology.
So yeah, at the end of the day, OpenSearch is basically a fork of Elasticsearch. So, you know, maintaining compatibility, given that they haven't really diverged that much yet, has been, I think, fairly straightforward from an AWS standpoint. So, yeah. And when they did Elasticsearch, or their old version of Elasticsearch, the managed version, right from then, they kind of started the process of separating out the compute and storage.
You know, just for, I suppose we're building up a little bit of a library of content now, and looking back to episode 5, we had a great discussion that I was reflecting on as we were talking about this. I have a little clip from that discussion just to kind of bring that forward to close out this segment. Should we do that?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
All right.
While they open sourced large chunks of Elasticsearch, which AWS basically took and turned into their, you know, Elasticsearch or OpenSearch service, Elasticsearch as a company still has the entire ELK stack that includes Kibana and Logstash. And ELK as a whole is basically what a lot of customers want to leverage. The Kibana visualization beats anything that AWS has, and customers want it. So it makes sense for Elasticsearch to leverage the marketplace to sell the whole stack as a whole with their terms and their pricing, even though it's on the AWS marketplace, and have it be available to AWS customers. So rather than fight AWS on just the Elasticsearch part, they are now dealing with the entire stack and are offering it in the marketplace. And that makes life a lot easier for both parties. They'll fight a lot less. And I think customers end up benefiting the most out of this.
No, I thought that was a really great insight that you had about, and this, I guess, shows again this both there's a bit of competition, and yet there's also this mutual benefit from iterating on this platform.
Yeah, I think it's a fairly symbiotic relationship at this point for a lot of these providers. I mean, you see a similar story with Snowflake. Like Snowflake's entire success is because of Amazon or with AWS, and you know, vice versa. Like AWS is basically getting a huge amount of workloads moved to their setup because Snowflake, you know, brings a whole lot of those customers for those kind of use cases onto their platform. So I think it is a very, very mutually beneficial relationship. I think you just have to make sure that each party is not stepping on the other one's toes too much. There is going to be some overlap for sure, but as long as they can see the mutual benefit of that relationship and each one knows how to ride the other's success, I think customers will stand to benefit the most out of it.
There's that great Silicon Valley word, co-opetition.
Yeah.
I think summarizes that. Well, let's close out this segment, have a quick word from our sponsor, and then we will be back to talk about Lookout for Metrics.
Is your public cloud riddled with cost and complexity? CloudFix is here to clean that up. CloudFix focuses on cost savings for your AWS environment by finding and implementing fixes that continuously save 25% off your AWS bill. Too good to be true? We've helped organizations save millions across 45,000 instances. Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.
All right, and we are back. And then welcome, Allison. Thank you for taking over for the interpretation. All right, we are talking about easily customize your notifications while using Amazon Lookout for Metrics. So just as a quick summary, Lookout for Metrics, the idea of Lookout for Metrics, it's anomaly detection for different logs, business processes, anything that could, well, any stream of data that you'd want to know has something changed, and do I want to know about it? So with this announcement, I'll highlight the main part. You can now add filters to your alerts configuration to only get notification for anomalies that matter the most to you. And you can also simply modify existing alerts per your needs for notification as anomalies evolve. Okay, so why is this important?
So the problem with a lot of your metrics and your data is that there's just, again, it's like a fire hose. And to be able to sift through that is incredibly hard. And as more and more, more and more of your applications move to this microservices architecture, and there's more Lambdas, there are more subsystems that are producing tons and tons of logs. Sifting through that is incredibly hard. And that's at the lower level. At a higher level, your application could be monitoring customer journeys. It could be monitoring, calls coming in, traffic. It could be measuring pretty much anything. And to be able to stay on top of it, to figure out what you should pay attention to at any point of time from an operations standpoint becomes incredibly hard. If you have too many, metrics, it's like when something goes wrong in an aircraft, and if you had 25 bulbs bleeping and alarms and sirens and all going off, you wouldn't know where to get started. In code quality, and this one kind of rings home very close to me, which is a lot of us have historically always used tools like Sonar Cube, or so on, for our code quality measures. And the one thing that I find happening, pretty much all the time, is within about a few weeks of setting up a tool like Sonar Cube or Cast or whatever tool you pick, you start seeing developers shutting off those rules because there's just so much noise that keeps coming in. You don't know how to filter out the pure signal out of it. And then you start, more often than not, just ignoring, the rule or the signal or whatever you thought was important to you. So while you have all of these metrics, the metrics are only useful when you have a mechanism of identifying the outlier very quickly and easily, and B, even amongst those outliers, being able to hone in and filter into only what you really care about actioning on. And not everything is actionable. Sometimes you just want to know about anomalies, but they help you, do a postmortem at a later stage. But you need to focus on only what is actionable. What are your decision making alerts going to be? Filter them down to just those and focus on those. But otherwise, your ops team is going to be all over the place. They're going to be running like chickens with their heads on fire. And that's not an uncommon scene in a lot of organizations.
You brought up a lot of really, really interesting points. What, like you said, if there was a plane that had 20 alarms going off, it would be really nerve-wracking. I actually read a book. So I used to work in medical data science, medical informatics, and they really think about this idea of alert fatigue. And because nurses and doctors deal with this quite a bit. So I pulled up this one study. One study showed 331 alerts were needed to prevent one adverse drug event. 90% of medication alerts are overridden by physicians, and more than half of overrides were due to alerts being deemed irrelevant. So it's a universal problem, not just in IT or tech, but just if you, as human beings, if we hear the same sound, I mean, every parent knows this, if you hear the same sound 100 times, you start tuning it out. And you have to really say, okay, is this important? And you have to set up your alerts system to think, okay, I really know and I really trust my systems so that if I get an alert, it's important.
Correct. And it's also important to, I think more often than not, it is really hard to create a rule-based anomaly detection. Like you can't say, hey, if my threshold crosses this, raise an alert, because it's very in an elastic, environment like AWS, where your loads might vary, your, all the metrics might be all over the place within a week. It's really hard to set rules because those rules are going to get violated in very short order. You need a machine learning like approach which starts to understand patterns a lot better, and then you have to detect anomalies based on that. And that's why something like lookout for metrics is really valuable. You're not just setting simple rules, which again will overwhelm you with outcomes or completely hide anomalies. Like you have to be flexible. You have to follow the pattern of the data stream that is coming in and find anomalies within that, rather than set very, you know, um, gut-based rules that determine, what you think might be an anomaly might not actually be an anomaly in the data pattern. So I think lookout for metrics plays a very, very important role in that first part, which is making sure that you understand and know of the right kinds of anomalies that are being raised or that you see in your data. And second is the filtering and simplifying the way you consume all of those insights or those anomalies is what is being made easy over here. So incredibly valuable. We actually have a very interesting use case that the team is working on right now, which is we have a product in which we have tons and tons of customer journeys. Like we have tons of website data that comes in for how it's a customer experience product. There's tons of data that's coming in about what a customer's journey is. And for some very, very large organizations, a journey could take you to 1,000 different paths. I think the largest one we have can have anywhere from 5 to 10,000 different paths that a customer can take through a simple journey. And in all of those cases, it is manually impossible to create the idea of an anomaly. Like I wouldn't even know where to start with creating rules. So you need to let the ML kind of decide what is normal, right? Because it's hard to objectively define that in rules as to what normal is. But once you feed the data to look out for metrics, you let it learn what normal is, and then you detect anomalies on that. Like suddenly your service goes down and you have the volume on one particular path dropping off dramatically and moving to another path because some service was down, or your login didn't work, or the lead didn't get generated and therefore didn't give access to the customer, the potential customer, or whatever. You might have n number of scenarios, but to be able to detect that anomaly, create an alert, and have someone look at it and fix it right away is incredibly valuable. And it's not just CloudWatch metrics that you can use this for. You can use this for a whole lot of use cases where you have time series data and you want to go figure out anomalies.
That's what I was thinking about was time series, and especially things like retail where there are cyclical patterns, right? And so if you had a simple threshold based alert, you might say, okay, well, on I don't know, holiday weekends, I'll ignore all alerts because everything goes haywire anyway. And that's a horrible practice, right? You want to be able to say, okay, I know that there's going to be more traffic, but within this context of time series, within this particular time window, I still want to know my anomalies. And so that's what this machine learning can do for you, is it can start adjusting based on historical patterns to your data. So say you have a product where every Thursday your orders spike. Then maybe you want to know if orders didn't spike on Thursday because something strange. Maybe you forgot to top up your ad budget or something. Whatever it is, you want to know, and that's in a sense an anomaly that's personal to your context.
Correct, and that is not something that you could just determine based on rules. You couldn't set threshold based on very simple rules. You would need an ML kind of approach. Or if you have daily anomaly, like, for certain services, we find that, between 9 and 10:30 a.m. During weekdays, you see this huge spike of consumption within, this microservice. And then you find that the rest of the day, everything is pretty much flat or low. But then how would you, model that as a rule? Like, you want to make sure that you're not going to change your rules every day. You're not going to change rules by the hour. And you don't know, okay, what if that 10:30 a.m. spills over to 11 a.m.? Like, would you treat that as an anomaly? It's just really hard to, articulate those kind of rules. It's easier to let a machine learning algorithm kind of learn what the pattern is and find anomalies within that.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, and I was just going through the rest of this article. You can not only have alerts. I usually have alerts going to Slack, but then you can also have a Lambda that processes them. So if you want some really complicated or have some fan out of alerts, so you can send one through SNS and then have that fan out to different consumers. I like that it's different business units. This can handle alerts that are contextual to different business units. So maybe finance versus DevOps wants to know different things about what's happening.
Yeah, and if you have a bunch of automation, by the way, you could have this go into an event bridge setup where you might have different routers or rules that then take this event and process it in different ways. Yeah, I mean, the number of services that you could then plumb kind of one after the other in succession is enormous. So it all depends on what you want to do. In fact, we are going to talk about another service with Connect, where they have incident management or cases that are now available in preview. You could probably take an event of an anomaly and then pass it on to AWS Connect cases. And you don't need to set up a separate instance or a separate setup for that at all.
Yeah, well, that sounds really, I'm looking forward to talking about, and we have some other things in Connect coming up later in the show. So to close out this segment, I wanted to show a clip of what happens when you can ignore an alert. This is from...
We've got a red light on the second intake valve. Ignore it. We'll be fine. Prepare.
I love the faces on Riker and Geordi LaForge here. And so I'd like to think about, so if we think about, this is Star Trek, where the crew of the Enterprise traveled back in time, and they're on the first launch of the very first faster than light ship. And you can see from the people for the perspective of Star Trek, these two commanders in the future, they're thinking, oh my gosh, he's ignoring an alert. Whereas in 2060, he's saying, there's got to be something wrong with my alerting system. I'm going to ignore it. And so we hopefully, when we're in the year 2020 or 2250, we will have such confidence in our alerts that any alert that comes up, we know has been screened and filtered, and the computer is presenting it to us saying, hey, this is important. Pay attention to it.
Correct. And I, this feels so close to home, because like the expressions on their faces, I have seen dev teams have the same expression when they're when they get these alerts from their CI/CD system about things failing, and then the manager's under pressure to kind of deliver, an outcome, and you have a deadline to kind of get your service published and, get the software out. And this is exactly the expression that developers have on their face. They all look at each other and like, cross your fingers, hope that this is we could probably get through with this. Like, it shouldn't matter that much. And they let it go, and then next thing you know, it's a disaster at the customer deployment. But
well, I can imagine the kind of alerts that were going off at Cloudflare this week. All right, well, let's take a quick break, and we are going to come back with service quotas for DynamoDB. So we'll be right back.
Public cloud costs going up and your AWS bill growing without the right cost controls? CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by focusing on AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe with zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. The best part? With your approval, CloudFix finds and implements AWS fixes to help you run more efficiently. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right, we're back. So this is, I think, a good transition. So this article is announcing enhanced integration with service quotas for Amazon DynamoDB. So Dynamo is, of course, their planet scale database service. And then with service quotas, you can view all the values of here. I think here's the important part. You can create CloudWatch alarms to notify you when your utilization of a given quota exceeds a configurable threshold. And this allows you to better adapt utilization based on your applied quota values and automate quota increase requests. So we're talking about alerts just a second ago, and here's a perfect use case. If you want to know the rate at which your table or the usage of your table is growing or shrinking or changing. So service quotas, I haven't used them a lot. It's based on my personal usage. What can we say about this announcement?
Yeah. So in general, if you look at any of the AWS services or a lot of the cloud services in general, the fact that they are elastic in nature, you can scale up or down almost infinitely. One of the DynamoDB's big claims is that they can scale up infinitely, right? One of the problems with that is that, you can very quickly end up in a scenario where some wrong setup within your application, or maybe it's an external attack of some kind, can just suddenly cause a massive spike in utilization of a service like DynamoDB, and can give you a massive bill to go, deal with. And you wouldn't be able to stop it because DynamoDB will scale up to deal with the load that's kind of thrown at it. And that's a risk. Now, the prudent way to kind of go about this is to say, I want to know when my system exceeds a certain threshold of utilization. And when it does, that's when I want to make important decisions. I want to decide whether this is, real load, where, hey, it's great. I had a marketing campaign and suddenly I have tons of customers trying out my product. That's awesome. So I want to let it go. Or this just feels like an attack. This has come out of nowhere. I didn't expect it. I don't know why suddenly there's this massive load. It's not going to impact business. It's going to, give me a crazy high bill at the end of the month. So I want to make a decision on whether to let this continue or not. So service quotas are actually an amazing way of managing upper bounds of your elasticity, where it puts you back in control. And with that control, you are then allowing yourself to make decisions that, can ensure that you are not causing waste, you're not spending money unnecessarily, and the services don't proliferate unbridled or unchecked.
Well, I think this is that phrase that I've heard you use a lot of, like limiting the blast radius, right?
Yes.
So what happens if, so what you're saying about this anomaly, right? If all of a sudden you've got this spike in usage, you'd expect your web traffic, your API calls, your storage to kind of all grow together. But if everything else stays the same and all of a sudden your database usage blows up, maybe think, okay, shoot, someone messed up the backup script or something like that, and we're making 100 extra copies or something strange that you have to go investigate because it's not part of the rest of the system, right? You'd expect the system to behave as a whole. And so if one thing goes off, in this case, all of a sudden your database service quota gets exceeded, but nothing else does, you'd want to know about that.
Correct. Like, I mean, there are scenarios where you do expect that elastic, nature to kind of kick in and move. So, for example, when Amazon themselves, they one of the interesting documents that they published after every Prime Day is the services and how much they were put under stress and what they could handle. So yeah, when you have something like a Prime Day come up, DynamoDB definitely kind of shoots up in utilization, and you suddenly start seeing many millions of transactions per second executing through it. But on a typical day, it's not something that you would expect. I would think that you would create some sort of an upper bound on the different API requests and stuff like that. And if something exceeds over there, you raise a flag or raise an alarm to say something is not right. I think this also goes back to what we talked about in terms of lookout for metrics. Like, imagine you could actually look at your lookout for metrics. You can get the statistical averages, like figure out what your 1 sigma or 1 standard deviation looks like for your particular metric. and you could use that to set up your service quota for that service. So your system knows and learns what one standard deviation implies, and you use that as a mechanism of managing your service quotas. That way, even if you have an anomaly, okay, you basically manage it to an upper bound, and you can take a call on what you want to do next. So that's another way of using lookout for metrics as well.
And I like what you said about, well, in a sense, that DynamoDB is going to handle whatever you're going to throw at it. Same with S3, right? You're not going to overwhelm S3 with your data. It's big enough, and so that you have to have some other mechanism for regulating this. It's kind of a funny analogy, but I was thinking back to my old diesel Land Cruiser, and I used to say, it has a natural mechanism for preventing speeding. It can't.
Yeah.
Right? There's no matter. I never got a speeding ticket in that vehicle because it's just not capable of it.
Yeah.
And so, but the Dynamo is the exact opposite, right? If you tell it to store 1 billion records or half a trillion records, it'll do it.
Yeah.
So you have to have some other way of it, and maybe that is what you want to do, but you at least want to know about it.
Yeah. No, I have known of a number of AWS customers who have had this scenario where there are these crypto miners, lurking around, and the minute they can get access to an API which allows you to launch an instance, they will use it. They will launch the P instance types, which are basically your GPU centric ones. They are expensive to launch, and they will launch as many instances as they possibly can. And then they will run all of their mining stuff, on it. Now, AWS has done a phenomenal job of, creating multiple checks and stuff like that. But one of the big, instruments that you have in your armory against that kind of attack is your service quotas. Because if you limit, like as a policy within our org, we set literally at the org level down to every account, our service policies ensure that you cannot launch a P instance type. If you want to launch a P instance type for machine learning kind of use cases, then specific exceptions are created. So it's just not possible to launch those instances in 99% of our accounts. Just because that's a control mechanism that ensures that not just external attacks, but even internally, that you're not wasting money on launching these instances, because unless you have a justifiable case for launching those kind of GPU based instances, you're just wasting money. So it's an incredibly valuable tool in your arsenal to fight waste.
When I was a naive college student, I once checked in an AWS key into a public GitHub repository, and that's exactly what happened. And that was a terrifying couple of days, and luckily I was able to reverse that. That was a long time ago. And now, luckily, they've worked with GitHub. You can't check in key that will be rejected immediately because they know the dangers of that. And
correct.
The more mechanisms for this, for stopping this, the better. All right. Well, should we switch gears to Lex?
Yeah, let's talk about Lex.
All right. This is exciting. Let me pull this article up. Here we go. This is, and I'll paste the URL in the chat. This is the automatic chatbot designer. This enables developers to automatically design chatbots from conversation transcripts in hours rather than weeks. So I think the idea here is if you have an existing customer support system, then you already have all these great interactions available, and you can use those to train a chatbot. And that way the customers, maybe the human support agents, can work on the special cases that the chatbot can't deal with. But this is, I guess, the idea of this. It's like reinforcement learning, right? Because you train it on this, and then you get feedback of how well the chatbot does. And I was reading through this article earlier. It says it will. You can iterate on this. Here we go. Developers can iterate on the design, add chatbot prompts and responses, integrate business logic, and build, test, and deploy. And so you get this continuous feedback. And I guess it goes on this theme that we've been talking about of using machine learning to tell you when well, both to train your models and then to tell you when it is working or when it isn't working.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with a personal confession. Lex is one of my favorite services. Just it's enabled me to do a lot of things that I would not have been able to do otherwise. So the way I end up using Lex, and this is just for some background about why this chatbot tool is so valuable. I have a terrible sense of UI and UX, and every time like a big part of my job is to work on product, and I think our strengths lie more on the back-end engines that drive all these amazing products. But when it comes to UI and UX, I find myself fairly handicapped, and thankfully we have a good team to kind of overcome those limitations. But I found when Lex first came out, again, one of those light bulb moments for me, uh, where I found that my team and I were really, really good at writing up API to do some very specific, operations or things. And it was amazing that I could take a Lex intent and map it directly to an API. And the fact that it was available in a chatbot. So whatever output I wanted out of an API, I did not have to build out a full-fledged UI with a bunch of drop downs and figure out how to get to the right data to, pass on to their API call. I could literally define an intent with slots, the slots being the API parameters, and the output would come right to me in the chat client, right? So I could directly interact whatever question I wanted answered. I would just write an API, and that API would be the intent, and the parameters that are needed were the slots. And then I could have a conversational mechanism of asking that question. And sometimes I would forget what the parameters are. So I would just say, hey, I want data on X. And it would say, hey, great. What date range do you want it for? And then, what particular dimension do you want this data on? And it would ask me all these questions back to help me fill out these parameters. And it would get me the answer. And I wouldn't have to build out a full-fledged UI with drop downs and selectors and date selectors and figure out how to construct this amazing UX that wouldn't feel painful.
And like you said, with intents, so I'm thinking about home automation, right? You could have an intent be turn on the lights, and then the slots are which lights. And
Correct.
looking at the way we have an Alexa speaker that doesn't have a screen, so it has to be voice activated. And so being able to have that UI, like you said, without building a drop-down menu, some API called to list the lights in your house, and another selector thing, and then how do you unselect and how do you cancel? You have it all. You can have a UI, voice-powered UI, which, as we discussed in a previous episode, all sci-fi in the future. You're just talking to the computer. So that's where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, like I think one of the simplest, or here's a use case that I use extensively. We use a lot of QuickSight dashboards that have tons of data, and I personally feel very handicapped, kind of navigating through those QuickSight dashboards because there's so many dials, and unless you really knew the underlying data and how to slice it, dice it, it just becomes really, really complicated. So every time I manage to work with somebody to create a dashboard that I like, to create, a view that I like of the world, I immediately take that and write up a very simple API endpoint that says, here's what I want, and here are the 4 parameters that go into determining the right data. And once I've got that little piece implemented, it's usually about 10 to 15 lines of code that go into a Lambda. I literally can ask my Alexa device, or I could just type into my chatbot saying, hey, can you pull up this particular data? And then it says, hey, give me the date range, give me parameter B, give me parameter C. I'm like, okay, what are the choices of parameter A, B, or C? It can give me those answers. I fill it up right away. And it gives me the report right there in my chatbot. So it gives me a QuickSight URL. I click on it and it takes me to the dashboard with all the parameters filled in. Like I don't have to fiddle with the UI to figure out how to get there. It's one link. It's got everything built in. I click on it. It takes me there. And that I find incredibly liberating because, now I'm not bound by all the UI and UX, and I'm not in UI hell, which is what I kind of dig in for myself. But back to this particular announcement, I think why this is so incredibly valuable is that back when I started, I'm talking about it 5-6 years ago when Lex first came out, I had to write lambdas for every little, chat handler. You unless you knew how to write lambdas, deploy those functions, figure out how you can scale them. If you had 10 parts of the conversation, then you'd have 10 different lambdas dealing with all this complexity. Now, if you go to the chatbot designer, you literally don't have to do any of this stuff. You don't even have to deal with lambda. You can literally just write up a bunch of your intent, define your slots, give it, just a few phrase words so that, or phrases that it can understand how to parse those intents. You can set context right there in the UI, and you can try it out right in the UI. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, you want to tweak some of those phrases because there's a different way that you're adding it, teach it. You can give it a few more, 3 or 4 more, and then you're all set. It works. So that's I think I would expect to see folks really leverage Lex to create a bunch of automations. The chatbot interface is so underutilized today. If you feel very, very comfortable with APIs, chatbots are probably the best way for you to start automating a whole bunch of stuff and getting value right away without needing to build out complicated UIs.
I completely. Every time I go through the React tutorial, and we're gonna do a quick switch here. Every time I go through the React tutorial, I can't do this. So being able to talk to a chat bot and just give it a little guidance on what to do, that's so much better.
Yeah. And in fact, it's just the API call. I mean, if you know how to design an API endpoint, the Lex interface feels so intuitive. Literally map the intent to the API function name. That's your intent. And each parameter in your function call is a slot. There couldn't be a better match for a UX to the backend system. I find it incredibly awesome. It's very, very liberating.
Well, fantastic. Well, let's take another quick break, and then when we get back, we will do 1, maybe 2 more announcements. And all right, we'll be right back in about 30 seconds.
Is your AWS bill going up? CloudFix makes AWS cost savings easy and helps you with your cloud hygiene. Think of CloudFix as the Norton Utilities for AWS. AWS recommends hundreds of new fixes each year to help you run more efficiently and save money. But it's difficult to track all these recommendations and tedious to implement them. Stay on top of AWS recommended savings opportunities and continuously save 25% off your AWS bill. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right, and we're back. So we've got 2 different announcements from the Connect team. So Amazon Connect, that's their essentially call center service, as it's grown into. And the first one, general availability of outbound campaigns for calls, texts, and emails. So going through this, and I'll post this announcement in the chat with the other ones. It offers organizations an embedded, cost-effective way to contact up to millions of customers daily. Now, this is a big deal. I mean, running outbound communications, in this age of spam, and there's always this kind of adversarial relationship when you're doing massive outbound communications that you don't want to get blocked by the main carriers. Back, I used to run my own SMTP server for sending emails a long time ago, but it's really hard to do that anymore without getting flagged as spam. But with Amazon, you can use Amazon Connect to send these calls, text, and emails, and they've done that hard work in terms of being on all the right filters and all that, and also regulation. This is really neat, I thought. New communications capabilities include features to support compliance of local regulations like TCPA, through point of dial checks, controlling calls controls for time of the day. So example, say you have some automated system, it's going to make sure that you don't accidentally call someone when it's 3 a.m. their time, and then they've got a tweet about it, and all of a sudden your company looks bad. It's all the stuff that you don't have to write yourself, that they've done for you and packaged it up. And then again, what's in the background, machine learning, predictive dialing, ML-powered answering machine detection, just to make sure you're optimally using your agent's time. So if there's an answering machine, your agent's not going to spend 30 seconds talking to it and then leaving this message that won't have a great return on their time investment, because that adds up. 30 seconds times a million it's a lot of time to be wasting. Rahul, what do you see about this announcement?
No, I've loved Connect, and I think we've had an earlier episode where I talked about how many amazing things they're adding to this particular service. In most organizations, the human resource that is involved in talking to customers is incredibly valuable and important on so many dimensions. Number one, they are your one touch point with your customer more than any other, like your sales folks, your finance folks, your product folks don't talk to the customer or interact with the customer quite as much as your support folks do. So making sure that you have consistency in the way these people or this organization interacts with the customer is incredibly important to your brand, to your reputation, and all of that stuff. The more you can automate, the more checks you can put in place, the more consistently you can deliver that interaction or the customer experience, the better your brand gets in the long term. If you have, two agents, one, being really, really customer centric and focused, and the other one not so much, you're going to have a very inconsistent experience from a customer standpoint. So tools like this, where you can focus your agents to only handle a narrow set of things which are really important and valuable, where machines cannot possibly kind of play that particular role, I think adds to the overall brand. You're using you're using people to only focus on the really, really hard stuff that requires judgment, that requires, a certain skill, and you're not having them do a very wide range of things, in which case you will end up with fluctuations in customer experience. So the more tools that come out of the Amazon Connect space, I think they are creating a pattern that could potentially allow you to build one of the best customer service organizations on the planet. And I love every one of these new capabilities that they're coming up with. Can you imagine reaching out to your customers in near real time when, let's say, a service is down, or let's say, you were about to get on a flight and the flight is delayed, or let's say there's an emergency of some kind, you need to get to the customers right away, and you reach millions of customers, tell them exactly what they should do. There is no way to handle this effectively when you're doing this, with people. It's humans don't scale quite the same way. So the more tools like this, which meet all the compliances, meet all the laws, keeping your brand identity, keeping your brand reputation intact, tools like this are invaluable.
And I love what you said, that consistent experience. And it's, when you deal with some of these poorly trained chatbots, and it's just, it can do your head in a little bit. Really, I just want to talk to a person. But then when you deal with these really effective ones, you thought, wow, I just looked at, I dealt with one for a refund, and it answered the question exactly what I wanted, didn't busy anyone. And I like that idea of, this is about outbound campaigns. So saying like a flight is delayed or some important thing, an outage in your service that the customers need to hear right away. That's the ability to do that, like I said, without having to code it all yourself, and make sure that you aren't disturbing customers or running afoul of some local regulation. That's a really neat thing.
Yeah. To give you a simple example, I'll just bring up one real world use case of this. every time you receive an Amazon delivery, within 24 hours, you'll actually receive an email that says, did you like the product? Did you receive it? Was it in good shape? Did the delivery happen, correctly? And very recently, I had ordered something where I had ordered 2 items. One of them came in, the second one didn't. And I was dreading going into the Amazon site and dealing with support. But because I received this email, it literally said, hey, just tell me whether you received it or not. And there were 4 options in that email. I was able to provide feedback without having to log into the Amazon portal, go into support. I mean, Amazon hides their getting to support is not the easiest thing on the Amazon website. So yeah, I was able to literally give feedback. They got back within 24 hours, and they had another set of the product shipped back to me, whatever was missing. And that customer experience is night and day versus me having to actually find a person, talk to that person, give them the feedback, which again, a very inconsistent interaction that I would have in that scenario.
And think about how it would have been where you have to call someone, you write down a 28-digit case number.
Correct.
Hope that you got it right. Hope that the next time you call, it got entered properly. But because you have that confidence that the case was handled, even though it was a bot and not a human being, you still had that confidence that it was handled, it was managed, and you got that quick turnaround time, which is you're probably going to do more Amazon Prime orders in the future, I'd imagine.
Exactly. Absolutely. I have Amazon Prime accounts in 3 different countries, depending on where I am. And yeah, I do that because of the consistency of the experience.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. Yeah, I think it's a really good thing that we can have that very consistent and yet highly scalable service.
Exactly.
Let's talk about Connect Cases. We've got about 3 minutes, so this will have to be a quick one. Built-in case management capabilities that make it easy for your contact center agents to create, collaborate on, quickly resolve customer issues that require multiple customer conversations and follow-up tasks. So that's what I was talking about earlier. You write down that big case number, you call in, you hope that it's stored correctly. This is a better way to connect cases. And I like what it said. It said, without having to build custom applications or integrate with third-party products. So from a developer perspective, again, less code as a liability. Sure, it sounds interesting and fun. You get to mock up this new database and think of all this stuff. But at the end of the day, why would you want to manage this if it's not the core of your business? And Amazon's iterated on it 1,000 times more.
Correct. And I mean, today, the reality is that the case management has become fairly commodity or relative commodity, where you use ServiceNow or Zendesk or Atlassian's products to basically decide that becomes your case management system. And then the pain really is to have all these systems integrate. You have to go through that process, make sure that the data is flowing through correctly. More often than not, the data actually resides in multiple different data sources where you might have some data in Salesforce, some data in Zendesk, and you need data from both of them to match up. Disambiguation becomes a problem. So Connect kind of helped solve a lot of that problem, where you have matches capability within Connect, where even if you're pulling data from different sources, the matches will disambiguate it. So I think it's already there, and it's only going to get better as Connect becomes the center of your entire CRM, customer support operations. The center of gravity is moving into the Connect product itself, or the Connect service itself, where that's where your single pane of glass, your single source of truth is going to reside. All the other peripheral systems that you end up using are going to have some slice of the data. But if you wanted that holistic view, Connect is probably the place to go look at to find out where the real truth lies. And it's also then the right place to have your agents look into as they're interacting with your customer, because that's where they have the 360-degree view of what is important to the customer, what do they care about, what should I not say, what should I, what resonates with them in terms of a tone. All of that, as it resides in one place in Connect, I mean, makes it much easier for agents instead of having to go to 4 or 5 or 6 different systems and try to pull that data out.
And it really is the make or break of customer experience, right? Because every company is going to have a bad experience or a bad initial thing, right? You buy a product, it doesn't show up, or there's a bug, or there's something bad happens. That's inevitable. But how it's handled, that for me, that determines whether that totally determines my brand loyalty. And like I said, there's certain companies where I know they will handle it if there's a problem. And even if the problem is extremely rare, the fact in the back of my mind, that confidence that they'll handle it is what keeps me loyal as a customer. And so being able to offer that without having to have this huge investment in data integration and pipelines and training, that's a really empowering thing for businesses of, I guess, any size, especially if the smaller ones where they don't have the scale to build this all out themselves.
Completely agree.
Well, we've gone to the end of our time, and again, we have more to share. So we'll have to. I think the queue grows faster than our ability to read from it. But
absolutely,
that's a great problem to have. Thank you again, Tess and Allison. Really appreciate your translation work, and thanks, Rahul. It's really good to have this great discussion. And we'll see you. Thank you again for the audience. We will see you again next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.